you help me, please, get a handle on how many young people have gambling problems and what the size of this issue is?
Well, it's very difficult to tell how many people actually have a gambling problem because a lot of the time it's hidden. It's an addiction that is very difficult to spot. But some of the latest surveys would suggest that there's about 50,000 people under the age of 18, which is obviously the legal age of gambling, who actually have a gambling addiction, which is the most severe type of problem with it, where it's affecting their finances, it's affecting their life, it's affecting their lifestyle. That is quite a big number. I'm sure there's many more who haven't identified themselves, who are probably at risk as well. So there is a real issue with it in the country.
And so, Adam, we hear a lot these days, don't we, about young people being unable to make rational decisions because their prefrontal cortex isn't developed. We saw rules last week about young drivers aren't allowed passengers in cars. Is it fair, though, to punish all young people with such legislation when really only a few have an issue?
So I think this regulation also goes a bit further to look at the affordability of gambling for anybody who has a problem, adults as well. And there's a consultation which is about to take place about what those limits should be, which is a good thing because up to now it's largely been completely underregulated. I mean, the last Gambling Act that we had was in 2005. So the government is right to say within that period, it has developed to the point where you have got basically a casino in your pocket. So I'm in favour of us having some kind of restrictions, some kind of monitoring to make sure that companies don't take advantage of people who have a problem, but it also allows the rest of the public who don't have a problem to still gamble safely as well.
And how would this work in practice? Obviously, if you're online, you have to give your date of birth, your credit card. That's easier to moderate. What about if a young person walked into a Bookies and sat down at a slot machine? How would they be stopped from gambling as much as they wanted?
So companies should already be checking who their customers are, what their age is, where their income is coming from, for many different compliance reasons. But I think in more complicated cases, for instance, where the gambling is done remotely online, they should be using technology to look at the data they have on that player, to look at the patterns of when they're playing, how they're playing. If they're staking a lot of money at night very quickly, that could be a sign. If they go from boom to bust and things like that. There is a lot that I think the industry can do using technology to be able to keep people safe.
Isn't the fact of the matter, though, that gambling is a hugely is very wealthy form of revenue for the government? It creates 110,000 jobs, according to the Gambling Commission, generates £4.2 billion in tax per year. That's not a small amount of money. So the government can't completely clamp down on this, can they? Because gambling is a substantial cash cow to the Treasury.
Yeah, of course. And Britain is the world's largest gambling market. Believe it or not. So, I don't think anybody's saying that we want gambling to be banned because so many people do enjoy it. And, it's kind of written into the fabric of our society, right? So many people do it. But I do think there's been this over-normalization of gambling, particularly when we look at young people, the advertising around sports, the sponsorships, the TV use, the social media. That's something which the government has really missed the mark on in this white paper, and I think that's something that we still do need to address.
And what would you say to people who just criticise this kind of movement as just nanny state? It's just interfering in a free market. It's a form of puritanism and prohibition.
I disagree. Like I just said, I don't think that anybody here is saying that gambling should be banned. And, I think even all of us gamble in many ways in our lives, not even through betting itself. We all take risks. And I think what this legislation needs to be about is finding that balance between having a healthy gambling market which behaves properly and doesn't do things which are against the law, but also puts in some protection for people where, we are a compassionate state and we are a country who wants to make sure that if someone gets into trouble, there is some kind of help there. So, for instance, there's a mandatory levy which has been suggested in the white paper where 1% of gross gambling revenues is going to go towards more research, more treatment, which is desperately needed for those hundreds of thousands of people who have a problem, because there is no integrated, coordinated treatment around at the moment as such. So, yeah, no, this is not about banning gambling. It's not about trying to tell people what to do or what not to do. This is just about bringing the industry into a more responsible state.
OK, Adam Bradford, founder of Bet Protect, thank you for joining us this afternoon on GB News. Well, join me now for an alternative viewpoint is Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Christopher Snowdon. Hello to you, Christopher. So I'm assuming that as a free marketer, you think this is just nanny state nonsense, the government, the long arm of the government stopping people having fun.
Oh, no, I don't instinctively think this kind of thing is nanny state nonsense. You know, there's room for regulation. My questions really are about how this regulation is actually going to work. It's all right coming up with these nice sounding ideas. We're going to check people can afford to gamble this much. We're going to have limits on stakes. Well, I think we should have limits on stakes, actually. I don't think there's any reason to have limitless stakes. And the vast majority of people on these online slot machines play for £1 or £2 a spin anyway. I think it's pretty much irrelevant, actually. The problem I have is this idea that you treat people who are 18 to 24 differently than other adults. I think that sets a weird precedent for other areas, particularly in a week where we've heard that the government is allegedly considering banning drivers of that age from carrying passengers. I don't think we want to start a two-tier society with adults now. And the second thing is the affordability checks, which, you know, to some extent the online gambling industry already do this. And they intervene actually in much more sophisticated ways, looking for hazardous patterns of play and intervening with text messages, phone calls, ultimately in some instances suspending accounts. And if the government wants to kind of codify that across the industry, that's not a bad idea. I've recommended that myself in the past. The trouble I have is that the proposals in the white paper are rather vague about what actually happens if you find out somebody cannot supposedly afford to gamble. So, for example, it's going to mandate that companies have to check up on people if they've spent £500 a year on gambling. Now, that is not very much on any leisure activity, really. So it's a very low bar. At that point, if you've lost £500 in a year, there will be what they call a frictionless check that will look for things like, have you ever been bankrupt? Have you ever had a county court judgment? Well, a lot of people actually have had a CCJ in their life. A lot of people have businesses that have gone bankrupt. It doesn't mean that they can't afford to gamble now. So my question, which is not answered at all in this white paper, is let's say that I do lose £500. Let's say I have got a CCJ. What then happens? Do I just get kicked off the website? Do I get kicked off every gambling website? And if so, what do they think I'm going to do? Do they think I'm just going to stop gambling? Because I won't. I'll either go down the casino or the high street bookmakers, or I'll go on an unregulated website.
Yeah, and do you think it's fair to say, Christopher, I mean, the huge amount of money generated for the Treasury by gambling, £14 billion per annum gross. We saw recently it getting tough on sponsors for gambling companies on football shirts. Is this gesture politics? Is this seeming to do something? But really, the truth of the matter is the Treasury is addicted to gambling itself.
Possibly. I mean, when there was the clampdown on the fixed odds betting terminals a few years ago, there was a huge amount of pressure to do that, but the government didn't actually do it until Philip Hammond had put up tax on remote gambling, on online gambling, the thing we're talking about now. So to some extent, the government is addicted to these revenues. But people have said that about smoking in the past, and that hasn't stopped the government clamping down in a big way on smoking. So I think the government is sincere about this. I think a lot of the anti-gambling campaigners are actually just anti-gambling per se. Some of them may genuinely just want to reduce harm here or there, but I think a lot of them just want to get rid of gambling as much as possible. And one of the dangerous things in this white paper, not a lot of people have picked up on, it was kind of alluded to by your last guest, this levy on gambling companies. Again, I've got no problem with that. Gambling companies were already spending £100 million a year on treatment for problem gambling. Anyway, this is now going to be basically mandatory. My fear is, in fact, this is a prediction I will make, a lot of that money will get hived off to various anti-gambling activists and academics, and the research that they do, so-called, will all be along the lines of, let's treat gambling like tobacco. And that, I think, opens up a whole new field, and I think we'll be talking about this for years to come.
Yeah, Christopher, I used to do a lot of work talking to young people about porn addiction, and the government then insisted the way around this was technology. Let's stop people accessing it. But I know as well as you know, young people are a lot cleverer than politicians. They'll simply get around it. They'll go abroad. They'll use different servers. So really, you can't stop people gambling, can you? If they want to do it, they'll find a way.
Well, with regards to people under the age of 18, hardly anyone gambles at that age. It's really difficult to do on a regulated website because they will very easily check how old you are. You've got to use a debit card, right? So that's not an issue. The problem is if people move to use a VPN and use an unregulated website, they actually even then are quite likely to be able to tell how old you are. I mean, it's not complete Wild West. They're just not regulated by the Gambling Commission. So when people talk about underage gamblers, like your previous guest was, actually, these kids they're betting with each other. They're playing scratch cards, which are still legal at the ages of 16 and 17. They are not gambling online. So I don't think we need to worry too much about people underage gambling online. As for people who are 18 to 24, they're adults. I think we should treat them exactly the same as any other adult.